week 3, if you can see that.
Mhm.
And so we the first chapter we had to do was chapter 5 in book 1. We have cause to be uneasy, and basically, and if I push too fast, stop me. If there's something you read that you'd like to chew on, let's chew on it. If I don't get, I have 14 slides, and I don't think there's any way, but I'll push us through a little bit. But if you want to say something or something you read, put it on the table. In this chapter, he talked about the kind of the conclusions of the moral law and recognizing there's something behind this world and universe that we call good, and we sort of know bad from also. And Lewis kind of concluded the world's a beautiful place. But the world can be quite merciless, right? The world, there's ugliness and there's chaos also in the world, but there's some moral power behind the universe. And then he said, we have to recognize we often don't obey that morality that we all sort of know is behind everything. If there is a power that created good, what happens when we act contrary to that power? So that was part of his observations. And he says we are in need of forgiveness. And as far as that now, so we haven't gotten to the Christian God yet, but so how would or could that happen? So if we are in need of forgiveness, or are we in need of forgiveness if we disobey the law? How would you answer that question at this stage in the book? And maybe we don't. Maybe a lot of people maybe don't think they need to be forgiven. They just made a mistake and, oh, well, let's go on.
Well, if we did not obey the morality, one of the ways I determine whether I think something is moral or not or immoral is whether or not somebody gets hurt. And if we don't obey the morality, then somebody has gotten hurt. And they may not even know they've gotten hurt, but they've gotten hurt. So I think we are in need of forgiveness.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. You know how things go when lots of family get together. In my family, inevitably, someone makes a misstep and someone else misinterprets it, and then
or interprets it correctly.
Yeah, be careful there, Mary.
That's like personal problems for me.
But I think I'm pretty sensitive that someone got hurt. And I'm one of those guys that I kind of want to go behind the scenes and see if I can fix it. But so there's something that motivates me. But I think you're right. Someone gets hurt when we disobey the moral law.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for me, that forgiveness comes from that person.
Yeah.
I mean, it's making that relationship right.
Right. And sometimes the other person doesn't think that they've done anything wrong, so they don't think that they need to be forgiven. And so sometimes I don't know this word, behooves the other person to just forgive them.
Yeah.
For their stupidity. Oh, excuse me, for their ignorance.
We're not talking about your family, Mary.
Oh no, we're not talking about my family.
They don't believe in sin.
But yeah, and there's the whole spectrum of how people react to being hurt or having hurt someone. And some people just slough it off and don't think anything about it. Some people are really captured by it. But,
right. Or some people have to take the high road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know? And
do you find it easier to forgive or to be forgiven in your personal relationship?
I think it depends on the severity of the immorality.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you one thing. I was going to say, if I forgive someone, and I admit something, I feel better. Sorry, Marcia, go ahead.
I often find it easier to forgive someone who asks you to forgive them than people who just recklessly go about. And I think that's where taking the high road comes in. Sometimes you say, okay, that happened. We just have to move on if we're going to have a relationship.
Yeah.
My
Yep.
problem is I might forgive, but I don't forget. And so I feel like I still hang on to that little zing that I can throw out, in the future to that person who upset me or hurt me,
Well,
Good point. It's easy to say forgive and forget, but it's really hard to forget.
But a trust has been destroyed. If you think that someone has wronged you and you have done everything that you thought was okay, but somehow or another this person has wronged you and they just come out of the blue, then you're wary. It's wise not to forget, because it's not good to walk on eggshells either. But I think it's maybe a little bit of self-preservation.
Yeah.
in it.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to deal a little more about forgiveness. I think I got a little ahead. So here's from page 15. And C.S. Lewis likes to talk about progressives and progress and how you define progress. And he said, because we all want to progress, right? We all want to advance. He says, progress is defined as, quote, getting nearer to the place where you want to be. Therefore, if we made a mistake, simply going forward will not get us there. We may have to correct our course. And in some place, he says, sometimes turning back and going backwards a bit and retracing your steps is progress. And then he said, the moral law teaches that God is good. Accepting a God is behind the moral law. Not necessarily in the sense of being warm, soft, sympathetic, or personal. And he talked about that quite a bit in this chapter, that just deciding or concluding God is good doesn't mean he's kind or forgiving yet. We're not there yet. Only that there is a reality behind ideas of good and bad. So the question was, how do you measure progress in terms of your ability to tell right from wrong? Or do you, or can we? A quick anecdote. We worked with a lady at one of the conference centers with youth. And sometimes she'd be trying to talk to this whole group of a couple hundred kids, middle school kids, and they wouldn't be paying attention. And she would yell at the top of her lungs, God is good. And if you were experienced in these conferences, the answer was all the time. And then she'd yell all the time. And then everyone would say, God is good. And pretty soon she was magical in some ways. Within a few seconds, she had the attention of everyone in the room. And I just remembered that because this fundamental idea that God is good is really important. And fundamental to Christianity too. So how do you measure your progress in terms of your ability to tell right from wrong? One of mine would be controlling my temper and controlling my tongue, like not blurting something out just because I think of it or I got mad. I think that's progress. For MacMichael, that's progress.
Go ahead.
For me, I think it's also how I feel about myself. If it is good within me,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of how perhaps I can tell my ability from if I'm on the right path or the wrong path. I don't know if that's a good way of doing it or not, though.
along this same line, maybe if your conscience is more often at peace than not at peace.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe if you can sleep better at night, maybe that's progress.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
There's an
Mhm.
element, I think there's an element here. It's kind of a touchstone for me. And that is when we deny who we are, when we deny what's in our heart, what's in our mind, it's as if we think we can keep secrets from God.
Mm-hmm.
And if we believe in God, then the bottom line is somebody knows who you are. Somebody knows what's on your heart. Somebody knows what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Somebody who's real important. And so the touchstone becomes, if we accept there is a living God and the God is within us, that God knows who we are.
Yeah.
And so we might as well not deny it.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. You can fool people, but you can't fool God. And who's more important? I mean, everyone's important, but really, if you think you think you fooled everyone into thinking you're a lot better than you are, that only goes so far.
It only lasts so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that came to my mind is, and I've read some good authors that say, did you take your eyes off yourself? Like let's say the last time you got into some kind of controversy, were you able to take your eyes off yourself and see it from the other person's point of view and try to fight the resentment or the temptation to want to get back at something or somebody? That would be another one. All right, let's keep going. If you think of another answer later, you can throw it in there. We're getting to the end of this chapter. It is after you have realized that there is a real moral law and a power behind that law that you have broken that law and put yourself wrong with that power. Someone just said being in a right relationship. You can be in a right relationship with God and with your neighbors and your family. It is after all this, and not a moment sooner, that Christianity begins to talk. That's what Lewis said, page 16. Agree, disagree, why?
I'd like to say that I don't like the word wrong in there.
Yeah, he's using it the way he established it in the first part of book 1.
Yeah.
That this we know when we have this innate thing, we know there's some kind of standard we're supposed to live up to. That's all he means.
Yeah, it's just a problem with verbiage, I think, because I understand that he was trying to establish that standard.
Right.
And he did a good job with the argument, but I completely agree with that. The first part of that question, it is after you've realized that there is a real moral law, yes, and a power behind that law, yes, and that you have broken that law, yes, and put yourself wrong with that power. That is the hard part, in that I often don't consider, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying that personally, I don't often think about being wrong with God. It's a difficult situation, so I guess I avoid it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I realize that I'm wrong because I've broken the law. And so it's in times of confession that I can see that I have wronged my neighbor. I have allowed pride to enter into my thoughts. And it is now in time of confession when I am humbled, for those attitudes that I have had, and realize that I'm on the other side of what God wants me to be.
Mm-hmm.
Don't struggle with and put yourself with wrong with that power. I just don't see God. I see perhaps, yeah, I did something wrong, but I don't see God looking at me saying,
You are
"You
in.
did you're wrong with me."
Me too, Bill. That's what I was.
And remember, at this stage of the book, we haven't gotten to the Christian God at all. We just gotten to there's some power that says we ought to behave in a certain way, and we know we don't. So let's keep going. Since I made too many slides. Yeah, from a Christian perspective, that's certainly too. So now we're into book 2, and he entitled the first part, "What Christians Believe." And I'm just going to read a few things from that part. If you are a Christian, you do not have to believe that all other religions are simply wrong all through. If you're an atheist, and I'm going to ask you if y'all understand or believe this. If you're an atheist, you do have to believe that the main point of all the religions of the whole world is simply one huge mistake. And I think he's basing that on, there's so many similarities of religions, and they all seem to have a lot of the same standard that they recognize. But if you don't believe, you think that's all hogwash, then you have to believe that the majority of the people all through history have made one huge mistake. And then he goes on to say, if you're a Christian, you're free to think that all those religions, even the queerest ones, contain at least some hint of the truth. Agree or disagree? And any other comments? You see the point?
Well, I agree with that. I agree with both those statements.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure not all Christians believe that we're free, because I know that even C.S. Lewis was criticized in the Chronicle of Narnia because he came too loose to saying that this group that was considered evil in this other religion, that they discovered that there was something good with them, and they didn't, which is the same thought that he has here,
Mm-hmm.
but it was in the other book, in the children's book. But people criticized him because we were allowing ourselves to think that other religions were good then.
Could have a hint of truth.
And could have a hint of truth.
Yeah.
Or understood some of the qualities of good, right? That this thing. And I've had people argue, and I've read arguments that, well, religion's just made up. All civilizations make up a similar religion. They can't explain the world. They can't explain why bad things happen. So they make up a God, and then they make up some other dark power that makes you go wrong. And they say, and the atheist will say, that's evidence that it's all made up. Lewis turns that around and says, yes, either that's evidence that it's all made up and every civilization made up kind of a similar religion, or it's evidence that there is a God and there is something real and we all have some certain perception of it. You see how, depending on how you look at it?
What did Lewis mean by the queerest ones, and why did
even the most odd religions, like I don't know, the Aztecs, where they demand blood sacrifice and cut people's heads off and whatever. I think he would call that probably nowadays the queer isn't the right word, but odd.
No, that's all about judgment, and to me, that's part of what's wrong. That people are judging others, right? You're not. Yeah. You're this religion and I'm this religion, and I don't know. Judgment seems to be coming into my mind, like.
And I got to convert you to my religion.
Right, mine's better than yours, right?
Yeah.
I think the operative here is you are free to think.
Right.
The difficulty is that many of the more fundamentalist brands of religion don't really include a freedom to think about other religions, and if they have anything that speaks truth, they're just immediately put down. They're wrong. We need to convert them. So, at the time C.S. Lewis wrote this, and the place where he was living was much different, I expect, than the one we're living in the United States today.
Yeah,
It's much
and I would
different.
say yes. And also, if you're his point here is if you're an atheist believes there is no God. Not that just they don't care if there's a God or not. That would be agnostic. An atheist, because Lewis was one up until he was in his 30s, because he spent a lot of time in writing trying to debunk religion, and he thought it was kind of a bad thing and superstitious. But he says, as an atheist, he was forced, if he stayed an atheist, he had to believe all the religions are people that have fooled themselves. So he would not be free to think there's anything valid, even in the best or the worst of the religions, or the most odd ones.
So he's making a comparison between being an atheist and a Christian, and your belief about other religions.
He's saying to him, if being a Christian, he's free to believe that other religions may have some valid perception of who God is. But if you're an atheist, you have to pretty much assume everyone got it wrong except atheists. And he feels like that's a lack of freedom in a certain way.
Wait,
Go ahead.
I just say, but how often in the Christian faith do we do the exact same thing as an atheist?
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
And
I think Lewis's reason for writing Mere Christianity was try to counter that I think he really disliked the backbiting between the different brands of Christianity. So the next part of the book, he talks about, well, what are the rival conceptions of God? And one is pantheism, and I've paraphrased some of this and boiled it down. It's on page 18. Pantheism means there may be a God, but God is beyond good and evil. Good and bad are, quote, merely our human point of view. The wiser you become, the lesser you would want to call anything good or bad. And the more clearly you would see that everything is good in one way and bad in another. So pantheism is sort of a belief that God is in everything and everything is good. It just depends on how you look at it and having the right perspective. And then he goes on to say, on the other hand, Christians, Jews, and Mohammedans who are, monotheistic, believe that God is definitely good and righteous. God takes sides. God loves love and hates hatred. God wants us to behave in one way and not in another. God invented and made the universe like an artist making a picture or composing a tune. And then he says on page 18, a painter is not a picture, and he does not die if his picture is destroyed. And apparently there's parts of pantheistic belief that if there was nothing in nature, if there was never any nature, then there never would be God. In other words, it's all kind of created at the same time. There was no God outside who created the universe and nature. That makes sense? And this is just from his readings of other religions, and he was quite a student of what other religions said. And I'm sure pantheism takes in a whole lot of other religions, that probably Hindu and religions that kind of worship the created thing, worship nature, and don't really think there's something beyond or behind nature. And then he says, Christians believe God made the world, that space and time, heat, cold, colors and tastes, all the animals and vegetables are things God made up out of his head, quote unquote, as a man. And he always says man. I always want to put person. As a person makes up a story. Christians
1940.
believe a great many things have gone wrong in the world. God insists, and insists loudly, on our putting them right again. If a good God made the world, why has it gone wrong? So that was something he wrestled with. If a good God, all powerful, made the world, then why did it go wrong? What do you think? Either based on your own studies or what you read from Lewis?
Well, I think it went wrong because we have free will, and we've done a lot of things to make it go wrong.
Yeah, you read the book. Good. Yes. Yes, it is free will. Yeah.
There's a lot of things that go wrong, and they're not good or bad. There's like, it's just to
Sure,
me
like-
way of thinking.
Like catastrophes, weather catastrophes.
A hurricane comes in and destroys everything and kills people. I mean, that's evil in a way, but it's just the way things are, and things happened. I don't know. There's a lot of things in the world.
What about the constantly repeating thing where one civilization or city wanted to defeat the other and kill everyone in the other city? I mean, I think that's repeated all through history.
Except like year one of VFM.
Yeah.
Over and over again.
Yeah.
Well, that goes back to free will.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm still confused
God
about
made the world. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm still confused about what pantheism. I was thinking God is in trees and God is in rocks and up here on the
Yeah.
mountain.
God is in everything.
Pan means kind of everywhere. Pretty much God is everything and everywhere, as opposed to God is the other. Some writers will talk about the ultimate other, God being, pre-existed us, God being the mind, God being the force behind the world that created us. That means God can't be nature. Yeah, that's what it. And there are many pantheistic.
I had a hard time with that too, a little bit, Caroline, because I feel very comfortable that God is in all of nature, as he is in me and you. Yet I also see God as a power not contained by the nature. Yet I believe the created put a part of the self in the creation.
Yeah.
Part of the creator in the creation.
Yes, the creator put a part of the
Right. So
creator into.
Mm-hmm.
He says on page 18, he says pantheists usually believe that God, so to speak, animates the universe as you animate your body, that the universe almost is God, so that if it did not exist, he would not exist either. And anything you find in the universe is part of God. The Christian idea, says Lewis, is quite different. They think God invented and made the universe like a person making a picture or a tune out of their own mind. I mean, so he went into some detail and gave some examples of this.
But he just left out, he didn't go quite far enough to me there. In that, yes, he created it, but he didn't completely step out of it and have nothing to do with it then. I mean,
Well,
I
don't think we haven't gotten there yet. Yes, that's a huge question for Lewis. Yeah. But I think we're not to that point yet.
Yeah.
Tom, I think your page numbers are wrong. I'm not.
an older book.
This is my Kindle version, and you're right, they might be. So I was just assuming the Kindle version, because right at the bottom it gives you page 18 of 95. How long is your book? All right,
It's
well,
about page, it's about page 36.
oh, okay, so I bet
Yeah.
this didn't have the preface that your book has. That
My
had
book goes
pages.
to 175 pages, Tom.
Yeah,
Oh,
mine is
oh, I'm sorry. No,
228.
I'll stop doing the page numbers. So this is under book
Uh-huh.
1, chapter 1,
It was a
rival
good idea.
conceptions.
Yeah, because all those page numbers are back from last week and I was so confused.
Oh, I'm sorry. Glad you told me that.
I'll have to
I'm
say
trying
that I don't see anything wrong with being slightly pantheistic in Christianity, because I feel so close to God when I am out in nature, when
Sure.
things seem to be put right by God, and I'm hearing the birds singing and the breeze is blowing over my face and it's green and it's wonderful, or even in winter when it's not green. I just find solace.
Right.
I find
Yeah,
God in
the-
nature.
The question.
I don't think Lewis would not disagree with that. He says that in another place he says, if you think you can find God in nature, I think one analogy he used, I might have mentioned before, is that would be like a character in Hamlet thinking they can find Shakespeare through another character in Hamlet. That Shakespeare is outside. The story of Hamlet came from Shakespeare's mind. It was his creation, and we're like God's creation in a story. But if we think we can look into nature and find the ultimate God, I'm just saying, Lewis believes that would not be correct in his view. But we don't have to agree with that.
Well, I think that God creates the world or those things, but that isn't God.
Right.
Right. That's the main point.
We go just a little less by worshiping the creation instead of the creator.
Right.
You know, if we worship creation, that just kind of limits us
Right.
instead of taking it further to worship who created the creation. But again, we might not be there, are we?
Right. All right. So the next slide has some summary, I would say. So he says, again, the problem, the universe contains much that is obviously bad and apparently meaningless. And I would say also chaotic sometimes, but it contains creatures, us, who know, or we think we know that bad is bad. And we recognize when something seems meaningless. So he talked about two views to address this contradiction. Ignore the page number, but this is in book 2. And he says the religious or Christian view is a good world has gone wrong, but retains the memory of what it ought to have been. So when you look at the world, do you think it is the way it ought to have been? Dualism, there are two, and dualism, this is another rival conception about the nature of God, is there are two equal and independent powers. And the reason we have evil is because there is a competing power with God that pre-existed just like God did, that is fighting an eternal war. And Lewis, if you read enough of Lewis, he gives lots of examples of this, where evil is an independently pre-existing thing just like God is. And so there are two forces fighting at each other, kind of like the force, the good and the bad force in Star Wars. And neither are inherently superior to the other, neither inherently right or wrong, quote unquote. If one of the powers is truly good, and it's not just our personal preference of what we would like good to be, there must be a third factor, the standard against which one is judged good or bad. One side is in a right relationship to the real ultimate God, and one is not. Does that make sense? And is that familiar when you did your reading? Because I'm picking things out that rang a bell with me anyway.
Well, in dualism, if we're talking about two equal and independent powers, I mean, if we say that God is good, then there isn't an equal of evil to God, is there? We're not saying
Well,
that.
in the rival conceptions about God, there are religions and are people who think that there's an evil out there that's directly confronting God, and that it is, and you'll see as we keep going how Christian's conception is different. And by the way, this is chapter 2 of book 2, and he called it the invasion. So this is a page or two into that chapter 2.
So I was just saying we've left. We know that atheism is wrong, but dualism is in the realm of there being a higher power or whatever, but not equal to Christianity. We're developing
Right.
another I don't know, another way,
But dualism
Yeah.
dualism is also used as an adjective to describe a type of Christian. A Christian could have a dualistic attitude.
Yeah.
Now you're using roar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Richard Rohr.
Right. Rohr talked a lot about that.
But
anyway,
a lot of people think that God, the goodness of God and the evil, I mean, they use the term devil, are equal in their powers and they're fighting it out. But God is above that power, so that they're not equal. They're not fighting it out.
And he'll go on to say, well, if dualism is wrong, then God must have created evil. If God is the only superpower, then God must have also created evil. So this is the kind of thing where C.S. Lewis is headed, that if dualism is correct, then there is this evil independent power. It could win. Like in your life, did you ever think ultimately evil could win? Because if you're a dualist, that's definitely one of the possibilities. And I think I've grasped from Christianity, we might lose battles, we might be hurt and injured, but God wins. Love wins.
Right. It looks like evil can win for a time, but ultimately, I think good does triumph over evil.
There's certainly chapters in human history where it seemed like evil won, but did it ultimately? And how do we feel about that, looking at history and the way we see our own future?
We have an example in the Bible of what I refer to sometimes as the duel between Christ and the devil. When he went to be alone and the devil appeared and I'll give you the world, you can have this, you can have that. He was trying to persuade him not to go back and be crucified. And then where would we be if that had happened? So you see a case of God himself being tempted by evil and overcoming.
Yep. All right, if we go to the next slide, we might see where Lewis's thinking is headed. I'm hoping.
It's on page 23.
Oh no, please. I'm sorry about the I honestly I thought
made
they
that
would
up now. I just made it up.
Yeah. So in my book, this was around page 20 and 21. He said, oh shoot,
It's page 44.
Good for you.
In yours. In yours.
That's
Can
probably.
you read that, Tom? I can read it.
Lewis go ahead and read that first paragraph and then we'll stop for a second.
Okay, Lewis concluded good is not independent of bad. Pleasure, money, power, and safety are all, as far as they go, good things. The badness consists in pursuing them by the wrong method, or in the wrong way, or too much.
Now read the next one and we'll stop. The next bullet.
Wickedness, when you examine it, turns out to be the pursuit of some good in the wrong way. You can be good for the mere sake of goodness. You cannot be bad for the mere sake of badness.
All right, let's stop there. What do you think of that? Is that?
I
Does
don't
that
know.
make
I could
sense?
be bad.
Yes,
I know
yes,
you
she can.
can.
All right, all right,
Yes, you
Rita,
can.
Rita, tell me. All right, he goes in. Why, when you're bad, why do you think you're bad?
I'm thinking I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm a variety of things. But yeah, I want just to be mad, being mean.
Yeah.
You're
So
selfish.
because you want to get back at, I'm guessing sometimes you want to get back at something or somebody because you want justice. And justice is a good thing, but that's not the right way to get justice. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is what Lewis is saying. I'm just picking up
Yeah.
his thought.
So are you saying that we're not, we're not bad, but
He's saying,
we are
he's
good?
saying no one, he's trying to say no one is evil or bad just because they think being bad is great. Now, I wonder, I've kind of, Lex Luthor and Superman certainly seem to want to be bad just to be bad, but he also wanted to take over the world. He also wanted the wealth and the power and the control. So wealth, power, control, being famous, those aren't in and of themselves bad. You see what I'm saying? But if they become the end goal for no other reason, they're bad. Make sense?
If you're hurting other people to get to it,
Yes. If you're trampling other people to get ahead,
to get to those.
getting ahead maybe is not bad, but trampling people to get there, yeah, that's a good example.
If you're forgetting your family while you are getting ahead and they are in ruins, then there might be something wrong with that.
Yep.
Mhm.
All right, Mary, read the next paragraph and then we'll stop for a second and see what we think.
You can do a kind action when you are not feeling kind and when it gives you no pleasure, simply because kindness is right. But no one ever did a cruel action simply because cruelty is wrong, only because cruelty was pleasant or useful to him. In other words, badness cannot succeed even in being bad in the same way in which goodness is good. Goodness is, so to speak, itself. Badness is only spoiled goodness, and there must be something good first before it can be spoiled.
All right, agree or disagree or comments?
I would agree, and it's the same thing as the Garden in Eden and the world that we have today.
Yeah.
And we continue to hurt our garden.
Mhm.
Yep.
And we hurt ourselves. There are lots of people who think that they are really bad. And I used to hear this a lot of time when I was working for the church. People said, oh, the doors would lock. If I came up into church and went there, the place would fall down if I walked in there. And I went, what? That they saw themselves as so bad that there was no opportunity for them within the church to receive forgiveness or love. And I thought, that's not what, I think you're looking at yourself in a, not in a true sense.
I think this has been wonderful. To me, one of the difficulties with all of this is the issue that you raised with us a long time ago, and that is the issue of standards against which you make judgments. So I've watched people who I grew to appreciate were extraordinarily good people. And their touchstone, their standard, was a standard that I didn't fully grasp in the beginning. And I made judgments about their behavior. What they're doing is crazy. They shouldn't be spending their time doing that. They ought to be over here doing this. But through time, I began to appreciate the standard against which they were working. And so I judged their actions in the beginning as bad against my standard, against a standard that I thought was a valid standard. So I kind of overlay on this notion of good and bad the caution that I need to be sure that I understand the standard against which I'm measuring it. I know people today who spend their time in their homes taking care of their children, and it looks really, really good. But if I kind of peel back the world, I see that they're neglecting other things that maybe they shouldn't be neglecting. It's complicated. And so I find myself becoming less and less judgmental. I worry about being judgmental because I worry that maybe the standard against which I make that judgment really isn't God's standard. And I'm not sure there's much hope that I'll ever fully understand her standards. The big ones are easy, but at times it gets complicated to make those judgments of good and bad. I hope that makes some sense.
How about this, Carl? Yes, it does to me. How about is the only person qualified to judge my standard against whatever standard I believe is me. Now, what I'm trying to say is I don't necessarily understand the context. I can't possibly, I'm not God, of someone who may be doing something I think is wrong because they may be neglecting their kids, or I think they are. They may be working 3 jobs just to try to pay the rent and put food on the table. And in the work I did, I really had to readjust my sense of judgment, and discard it altogether, really, sometimes. And
that's an excellent example.
And
excellent example.
What this slide is supposed to demonstrate is the difference between dualism and what this good standard gone wrong is, and that C.S. Lewis believes that Christians believe evil is good gone wrong, evil corrupted. And the Garden of Eden is a good example, the first example, right? God said, you can have any fruit, you can do it, everything. This is a garden, it's perfect. I've created it, but you can't eat that one fruit of that one tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that was just what they wanted to do because they took a good thing and questioned God. So it isn't just a corruption of something. Sometimes it's rebellion.
When I read the last sentence in the first paragraph, the badness consists in pursuing them by the wrong method or in the wrong way or too much. My first thought was, according to whom? How much is too much? Like that.
Lucy, I think that it's directly at what I was trying to say. I didn't do a good job of it.
When you said that, it made me say that too.
Yeah. It's the standard against which we make those judgments.
Yeah.
What's happened to me as I've gotten older, and I joke with myself a lot. I figure if I live to be my father's age, I'm going to be damn near perfect. Because with each passing year, I become less and less and less judgmental. I become more and more and more like him, my father. My father was, as a young man, I think I remember him being really judgmental. And the older he got, the less judgmental he became. And he never verbalized it this way, but I think he began to realize that stuff's complicated. We need to be real careful about the standards to which we hold others accountable. Because
Yeah, and I think you start to see the stresses and strains that people are under
yeah,
and how they handle their situations and how they can handle them badly. And we all do, but we also handle things well. And I think our families or our community can sometimes, and people who care about us can let us know when we've gone in a way that's not whole for us, or and if we're willing to listen, then we'll take it well. There are times when we don't want to take it well.
And I was just going to throw in, Mary, too, that remember the question a while back, progress. For me, and that's a good question that Carl raises, and Lucy, is that, yeah, how do I know it's the wrong method, the wrong way? Well, that's kind of my progress. I think wrong way and too much now, I think I'm smarter and better at that than I was. And it's become a little more clear. And remember, we still haven't gotten to the Christian emphasis. Like, for example, we haven't even talked about love yet as one of the standards. So let me forge on. Anyone else want to say something?
I was just going to say what I choose to believe is that this progress that we make is clear evidence of grace.
Yeah.
Because I think it is a very graceful thing to begin to realize that you're not quite as good as you think you are.
And
I also used to say my dad's stance on things softened, and that wasn't in a bad way. My dad was the same way. He became wiser and really softer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, to me, I really believe it's a real. I choose to believe that it's a real sign of grace.
Bill, did you say something? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Well, I think too, and I just, but yeah, there's those nuances that are good and bad, or somewhere in. But then I think is there anything that really is evil then? That we do we come to a point? I mean, is Hitler? Well, if I grew up old enough, eventually I'd see that he probably was an all right guy. Well, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know, and I play with the idea that there was some part. I guess he was born. That was the good part of Hitler, but it just went bad real quick. But there are some things that are just bad or evil. I would say, even though as I grow older. I mean, when I'm talking about relationships with Reed and I, yeah, there's good and bad and evil and all that stuff. And I think we're as we've got to 48 years now that we say, well, that isn't worth the effort. But I still think that there are those other things, those overarching things that are important to say, this is wrong. This is wrong. We can't do this as a society. Do I think I can get beyond that the civilization can get beyond that? Maybe if the world wasn't there, is God there? I don't know.
And remember Jesus' context as a Jew who had 400 and something odd laws. They had to follow every one of them. Well, then he came and said, but I have a new way to look at the law. He said, I didn't come here to abolish the law, but here's how you know that the standard is correct. And then he started talking about things like love and looking at others as yourself and things like that gave, put more flesh on the standards and made them a little more real, if that makes any sense. But that is very specifically a Christian and not just seeking some arbitrary standard. So the next slide, Lewis asked, do you now begin to see why Christianity has always said the devil is a fallen angel? An angel was a good thing. The angel fell and turned against God. Did anyone know what this is another thing, that sin and evil isn't just someone, like he said earlier, I'm going to be evil just because I want to be evil. I think evil is really the thing. Sin literally means missing the mark. Well, and I think in archery, if you miss the target, it is still called a sin in tournaments. So that's a different way of seeing it, that I'm trying to aim at something. Maybe I'm so off base, my aim is horrible, and I've missed the mark. Well, that's sin. And to me, that's kind of like the fallen angel thing. And so the second bullet is a real recognition of the fact that evil is a parasite, not an original thing. The powers which enable evil to carry on are powers given it by goodness. Agree with that? And does it seem different than dualism?
Well, it just seems like a corruption.
Right,
You know,
corruption's a
that
word,
those-
yeah.
That there are those things that are, it wouldn't be, I mean, it has to blah, 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 blah. It has to come from the good thing for it to be something else. It isn't the something else. It's the good thing first, and then the something else that's evil. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of consistent with what the Bible, all the stories in the Bible are people and followers and Jewish people that knew the right way and didn't do it. You know, Moses went up on the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, and what did the Hebrews do? They made an idol. They made a golden calf. Did they do that because they wanted to be evil? Or did they just become corrupted and they were impatient?
They went back to their old way.
They were just scared.
Yeah, I mean, fear, I think fear
They were
can,
just scared, didn't know what to do.
yeah. Yeah. The last bullet on this one is all the things which enable a bad man or woman to be effectively bad are in themselves good things. Resolution, cleverness, good looks, existence itself. That is why dualism, in Lewis's words, in a strict sense, will not work, or at least for him. And I can just say I think he studied this in quite a lot of detail. So any comments on that? You see what direction he's going?
Yeah.
I really like that. I do like the second and the third bullet point, and I'm really appreciate what Carl said. I think looking back through the years, we see leaders and we put them on a pedestal, whether it's in the church or in the world or community, in our families. And when they, mess up or do wrong, then everyone wants to trounce on them. But the longer I live, the more I see that they're just like everyone else. And we shouldn't be so judgmental of our leaders, whether it's in our churches or wherever. And I'm thinking I need to be less critical and more loving. And I think that comes from the heart of God. And that's what I struggle with. Been struggling with it. My birthday will be Monday and I will be 67. So I don't mind telling him that. So anyway, it's something maybe in another 6 years, I'll still be struggling with it, but that's my struggle every day. And, that's my prayer that I will get better at that, not see when people have this evil or mistakes, just to trounce on that if they're a leader or even if they're not.
We should give other people the same break we would like if we made a bad mistake. Is that a way to say it?
It seems to me that there's something that didn't Christ say something kind of like that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? That can heal a divide in a family and things like that. If someone holds out the olive branch sincerely, sometimes years of resentment and bad feelings can go away.
Sometimes.
You just don't.
It didn't happen today.
What?
It didn't happen today. It doesn't appear.
It doesn't always happen. But someone has to be willing to do it. Someone has to take the risk, right?
I'm not saying that. I said, but it doesn't appear that You know, that they came together and they kissed and everybody is
You're talking about
better.
like,
Yeah. I'm talking about
Yeah.
Just an aside.
All right. We're a little after 8. Let me just
Oh.
run through a couple of these. Oh, look at that. I didn't do the question very well. That question is whatever question you want it to be. So
Very good
this
question.
is the last chapter. I was tired. I mean, we were traveling the whole day. So I made a mistake. So please be forgiving.
Oh, not.
It was
He
prompted
calls
out
this
of
chapter
goodness.
the shocking. This is called the shocking alternative. God created things which had free will. That means creatures which could either go wrong or right. If a thing is free to be good, it is also free to be bad. And free will is what made evil possible. Why then did God give them free will? Because free will, though it makes evil possible, is also the only thing that makes possible love or goodness or joy worth having. Do you agree with that, or do you see that point?
Point.
Yeah.
I think we've grown up with this point, haven't we? You know, so it's hard for me to look at it in a different way, in a different, you know, I've been given the free will to make the mistakes and to own up to them instead of being punished all the time for those mistakes. That there's love and acceptance at the end of ownership with that. And I think
There's a lot of, oh, sorry, Mary.
I think it makes the love and the goodness more tender and more valuable to know that I've messed up and it can be, and grace is revealed.
Happy or loving or good.
Yeah. I think there's some good love stories we've seen. I won't be able to bring any of them to mind, but where one person loves another person, a man or woman, and they'll do anything. They will go to any lengths to make that person love them. They'll manipulate things. They will sabotage someone else. And in the end, they're trying to force someone to love them. Or the alternative is, you know, someone loves you because they really want to, because they have the free will. If you have to, or some people use money to buy loyalty, right? And so if someone's loyal to you because you paid them every day, then you stop paying them, they're not going to be loyalty. That's not free will. That is a coercion. So what he's saying here is we have the choice to be nice to each other and be kind. God didn't make us, and this is why I don't like when religions use threat of death and hell. You know, God's going to throw you in hell if you're not a good person. No, that's not what you want. That's not why you want someone to be a good person and believe in God. You want them because that's how they become the best person they can be. Right.
Yeah, with, you know, thinking back to the garden, I mean, we don't want to be puppets on a string.
Yeah. Yeah.
We would not know our own self-worth. We would not know that, you know, that goodness and love.
Yeah.
It would be squelched.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wouldn't be, the freedom is what allows us to be our whole self and to pursue the opportunities to be all that God has created us to be.
But sometimes you don't know the freedom until you've done something so challenging, maybe, you know, maybe getting through suffering. And even in the suffering, you know, you intensely realize how loved you are or how much you love another. So to me, the freedom is so important because, like, say, for instance, in my job as sexton, there are so many things that I have no idea how to do. I don't like to read direction. I have to figure things out. And I laugh at myself all the time. But when I finally get it right, I feel so happy about myself, and it makes me be a kinder, sweeter person because I'm willing to give away the goodness that I feel about me.
Mhm.
And I just tie that to free will.
Me too.
It's a whole lot more valuable when someone chooses to do the right thing than there's some coercion, I guess the best way to say it. And I think God put that into his design. That makes sense. Next slide, when we have understood about free will, we shall see how silly it is to ask, as someone once asked me, why did God make a creature of such rotten stuff that it went wrong? The better stuff a creature is made of, the cleverer, the stronger and freer it is, then the better it will be if it goes right, but also the worse it will be if it goes wrong. You mentioned Hitler. Hitler had many gifts and talents, and he could speak. So he would have made a great positive leader, but boy, he made a great devil. And I think that's part of the point. And so the question I put in here is, how did the dark power go wrong? What is the nature and origin of evil or badness? I mean, another way the Bible put it is, to him who is given great gifts, much is demanded, or he who is given much is expected,
Required.
that kind of thing, or required. You know, that makes sense on this level. That we get to choose. I think this might be getting towards the end, and I didn't even put any questions on here. The moment you have a self, there's a possibility of putting yourself first, wanting to be the center, wanting to be God. That was the sin of Satan, the sin he taught the human race. What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, and invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside of God. The real shock among these Jews, a man who goes about talking as if he was God, claims to forgive sins. He says he has always existed. He says he's coming to judge the world at the end of time. So I think we're running out of time, but this is the point where I think where Christianity is starting to show influence Lewis's thinking quite a bit. And somewhere in this chapter he said that people have often told him, I believe that Jesus Christ was a great teacher, a great moral teacher, and you know, he said a lot of great things, but I don't believe he was a son of God. And Lewis says that's exactly the thing you can't say about Jesus, because if he was a great moral teacher and said some of the things he said about being God and being able to forgive other people's sins, he wasn't just forgiving people that sinned against him. He was saying, I forgive you of all your sins. And that would not make sense, especially to a Jew, that Jesus could do that. And Lewis said something like, he was either a lunatic on the scale of some person who thinks they're a poached egg. He says something about a poached egg, or Jesus is really who he said he was. So all this was culminating, all this idea of a standard and who demonstrated the standard, and then what he taught and where this standard came from.
Tom, can I comment just on one thing?
Yeah,
It
please.
is in the first bullet point. I think we all fall into every day, probably multiple times a day, of wanting to be the center, the things that make us frustrated, or because everybody doesn't see it from our point of view. Or, in y'all's case of everything going wrong, whatever your reaction was, the truth was everybody else was experiencing it too. And it wasn't any more one person's responsibility to fix it than another. But the point, I guess, is where I'm trying to be is we don't generally, I'm guessing, tied into wanting to be God. Yes, I can see how I want things to go the way that I want them. In other words, I would like to be
Right.
the center and everything revolve around me. But do I really want to be God? Well, maybe I need to maybe I need to take my consciousness a little farther and see that I just want what I want because I want everybody to live under me.
Yeah.
Good thing that's not the case. Anyway, I
Yeah.
just appreciate that point.
I also think part of that is exploring our being, exploring what you can do and the possibilities that are that you can accomplish. I see it in our 4.5-year-old. There's this, I can do this. I can be this. I am this. And yet there's, it can go overboard. And I think humility is somewhere in there. There's the significance that God has given us that we are beloved, but then there's realizing your insignificance too. And I have a hard time with that.
Yes, but it's a very comforting place to go if you will pay attention to this is the moment that I am trying to be in the center. And then you can take yourself to that next place of humility, or allow God to take you to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, humility is an important Christian word, and to have faith in God means we recognize that God is, our life comes from God, that wisdom does come from God. Our standards come from something else. We didn't just make them up. We can't enforce them on our own just for our own purposes. So I think that's as far as we've gotten so far in the book, is that about this standard. And then all of a sudden this man came along who kind of lived the standard, right? He put others in, he became a servant, right? He said, I'm a servant. And he put others in as more important than he is, which is kind of counter to the Darwinian survival of the fittest, right? I mean, it's the natural law, the way the science would have it is, it's fine to do whatever you want to do to make yourself better. That's what all nature does, right? There's a pecking order. The more superior animals eat the lesser animals. But this is a standard that's quite different than what, and he did talk about what would have evolved naturally as opposed to what he says we know innately. So I think I've completely used up the time, and I don't want to go over. But any other final comments? You see, he's I like Lewis because he's drawing a progression of steps in how we think about it and laying a foundation. And then upon that foundation, then he encounters Christianity. And it's really what happened in his life, what he's trying to repeat here, without being denominational, without trying not to be superior,
Mm-hmm.
So any other final comments? I appreciate all your comments. I know that was a lot to throw at you, and I was a little bit of a shotgun thing because we spent most of the day traveling today.
You did a great job.
Good job.